So when you understand the enormity of this problem, of our healthcare system having basically become a golden goose for the large corporations, and the amount of money that comes in through politicians and the public relations and the paying doctors and so forth, you get a hopeless sense. I spent more than 10 years in national pharmaceutical litigation. During those 10 years, I got to see what was in the corporate computers. We got the hard drives from the executives and the scientists and got to see how this really works. I dropped out of litigation because it wasn't changing anything. Money changed hands. People who were injured got paid off. States who got hurt by opioids got some money. But it's not changing the basic structure of what's going on, where the drug company's purpose and realized purpose is to just extract as much money from the American society as they can. That's why I wrote Sickening, to explain this problem and to show people that there's only one path out of this. The only path is for Americans to become educated about this problem so that the power of Americans voting is greater than the power of the drug companies' political contributions and lobbying. There's no other path out of this mess than for the American people to become educated enough to act in a way that will create genuine reform.
But if these megalomaniacs get their way with their one world political and economic system that they're trying to build, a lot of us won't wake up. They are obsessed with the idea that there are too many of us on this planet, that we're consuming too many resources, that we're a cancer on the earth. So many of us won't wake up. I'll just say that clearly. They say that clearly. And when I go to these UN summits, it's just out in the open. They don't even hide it. They believe there are too many people here. They think the ideal population would be somewhere between 500 million and maybe 1 billion. And even that, with the emergence of artificial intelligence and robotics, I think a lot of them now think that even that is far too high. So many of us won't be waking up if these megalomaniacs get their way. But those who do wake up, I think really can look forward to a future of slavery, a future where all of your decisions are made for you, even basic decisions that in the past wouldn't have even been considered as possible candidates for usurpation by government. Like, who do I want to marry? What kind of family do I want to have? How many children do I want to have? What kind of work do I want to do? What do I want to study? All these things would be determined for you. The technocrats back 100 years ago used to claim it was under the guise of efficiency. So we'll make the world more efficient. Today, it might be under the guise of being more sustainable. That's just another ridiculous buzzword to justify tyranny. But the short answer is you will lose autonomy, you will lose sovereignty, you will lose liberty. And to the extent that you're allowed to operate and exist at all, it will be as a means to an end. That end is to empower and enrich the people at the top. So you will not make your own economic decisions. You will not make your own personal decisions. Your entertainment will be kind of ubiquitous. Drugs will be ubiquitous. I mean, about as miserable as can be. They use fear as a very, very powerful mechanism. And when people are scared of overpopulation, of a disease, of whatever, they're willing to accept ideas that they never would have accepted before. Now, in communist China, you don't even really have to convince people to do stuff. You just point a gun at them and force them, or throw them into a re-education camp, or cut their organs out. So in China, they've even dispensed with the pretense. But even in the Western world, it's so alarming that they have been able to make so much progress. And it's through a combination of dumbing down the population, indoctrinating the population, and terrorizing the population that they've been able to accomplish so much. I hope they won't succeed, but they're definitely making a lot of progress. Really, the primary incentive that they use for the media is prestige and money, right? Unfortunately, just like in other professions, most people will sell out their principles. They'll sell out their fellow human beings for money and prestige. And we see that so clearly in the media world. You look at the people who are paid the most in the media world. They're all people who have sold out their nations, who've sold out the truth, who've served as propagandists for evildoers, in many cases consciously doing so. So it's very, very sad. When I go to these UN conferences, there are thousands of so-called journalists there. I call them the cheerleading section. It's pathetic. You see a Chinese communist come out and make an announcement that we're going to save the world with this climate agreement. And these guys, like trained SEALs, they get up and give them a standing ovation. Are you kidding me? You don't have any real questions to ask them? So it really is disgraceful. I even hesitate nowadays to, like, if I'm in an Uber, somebody asks me, what's your job? I even hesitate to say journalist, because they just assume, like, oh, you're one of those, like, nasty, lying, disgusting, dishonest propagandists, enemies of the people, if you will. So that's very sad. But we do still have journalists out there who are doing good work, and I'm grateful for them. And I hope, if we defeat these megalomaniacs, that history will record that there were still some of us out here doing real journalism, despite what the clown car at CNN and all the rest of them were doing. It is very demoralizing to see what a joke journalism has become. And the people see that. There was just a poll that was released recently here in the United States that found that 60% of Americans regard the media as enemies of the people, which I don't like that phrase because it reminds me of, communist China and the Soviet Union and things. But the reality is, yeah, the media in America has largely become enemies of the people in the truest sense of the term, in that they want to hurt you, they're selling you out, they're destroying your country, they're destroying your family, they're lying to you. So they really are. It is encouraging that there are still some solid voices out there that are doing real journalism, that are digging out the information and doing their best to disseminate it. But what's happening is the system, if you will, is doing everything possible to silence those voices through different means. Now, some of them they just murder outright. Gary Webb was a really good example who exposed the CIA's involvement in cocaine trafficking. Well, he committed suicide by shooting himself twice in the head. And that is not uncommon, unfortunately, when it comes to journalists. There was the journalist from Rolling Stone, I believe Michael Hastings was his name, who supposedly crashed his car into a tree at 100 miles an hour or something. And then heads of intelligence agencies came out and said, oh, we have the technology where we could have done that. Not, we definitely didn't, but we could have done it. It's like they're laughing at us, right? And it was the same with Gary Webb. Everybody knows he didn't, everybody with a brain knows he didn't kill himself by shooting himself twice in the head. But it's like a message, right? If you touch these stories that you're not allowed to touch, bad things will happen to you.
The Sustainable Development Goals themselves are very, very closely aligned with the planks and the plans of the communist movement since the 1920s. You have to remember, back in 1963, this was actually read into the congressional record in the United States, that there were 45 plans of international communism. One of them was to institute the United Nations as the savior of all nations, and to get everybody on board with falling into line with what the United Nations is trying to do. The 2030 Agenda is all about instituting the United Nations as that one global authority that's going to dictate everything. So all of the plans, all the planks of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, they fall completely in line with what Karl Marx had written in the Communist Manifesto. You talk about the stuff with agriculture, absolutely mirrors everything that Karl Marx wrote about agriculture. You want to talk about medicine, absolutely mirrors what the communists have been implementing with trying to create universal health care since the 1950s. And you want to talk about things with equity and redistribution of wealth. These are all part of Marx's plan. So the Sustainable Development Goals at the very heart are communist goals. And the real question is, why? Why is the Catholic Church so invested in making sure that those plans are realized? And the real answer is that the Catholic Church has been infiltrated. And that's the reason why they are so committed to pushing these goals of the United Nations. One of the things that you have to understand is that back in 2014, Pope Francis had a meeting with Ban Ki-moon and Jeffrey Sachs about the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. In that meeting, they were talking about the sustainable development, and Pope Francis committed the entire Catholic Church to the Sustainable Development Goals. And ever since then, every single year, he has given all kinds of statements and public statements and calls and cries and calling for the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. One of the things that he did was he promulgated an encyclical called Laudato Si. And this came 1 year after he committed the Catholic Church to the Sustainable Development Goal agenda. Laudato Si makes 28 references to sustainable development and calls for the adoption and implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. And ever since, as I mentioned, he has made it his pontificate's agenda to make sure that this globalist ideology is implemented. The question is why? Why is he doing this? And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that Pope Francis has a lot of friends who are communists, a lot of friends who are part of the liberation movement, and that friendship is predicated on a similar ideology and philosophy. And he is very much in support of this one world ideology, and it's very dangerous. So in 2015, Pope Francis actually addressed the General Assembly of the United Nations, and I want to read to you something that he said. He said, "The adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development at the World Summit, which opens today, is an important sign of hope. I am similarly confident that the Paris Conference on Climate Change will secure fundamental and effective agreements." He also said in 2016, this was during an address that he gave to the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences on the topic of human trafficking. He said, "I am grateful for this fact that the representatives of the 193 UN member states unanimously approved the new Sustainable Development Goals." And then later in March of 2017, the Vatican held a conference that was called Religions and the Sustainable Development Goals, Listening to the Cry of the Earth and of the Poor. I mean, again, wrapping in all of this earth crisis and poverty crisis stuff just to try and give a sense of urgency. He said this, "The 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals approved by more than 190 nations in September of 2015 were a great step forward for global dialogue, marking a vitally new and universal solidarity." Those are chilling words given what we know about the Sustainable Development Goals. And what's more is that we have to understand the Vatican has never really been critical of the very grave and terrible elements of the Sustainable Development Goals and the dangers that they impose to anyone around the world. They just keep lauding them as if they were this great saving plan of these oligarchs that are going to now transform society and make things better for poor people. So they're using the plight of the poor to push an oligarch's agenda. That's sick.
So what can we do about it? So this goes back to this whole thing. The world thinks global. All solutions are local. So the tinier you can make yourself, the more self-reliant you can make yourself, the more independent you can make yourself, the more likely you can survive whatever the world is going to do to itself with relatively little impact on your safety and security. On the other side of the coin, the world is going to change enough that a lot of the conveniences that we may have today, we may not have the way that we think that we would have them. When the Roman Empire fell, and we went into a period of time called the Dark Ages, 400 years later, people came back to Rome and marveled at the ruins of the Roman Empire and could not figure out how they built it. In 400 years, they had lost all of that architectural knowledge. They had been dumbed down, how their legal systems worked, how their political systems worked. The greatest empire imploded, was gone, and the ideas of which they built all of that stuff on eroded with the buildings that they had built. In my mind, it's easy to see what you would have to do to be sustainable local. So, like in my case, I live out here in Idaho, so I had a rule, and I didn't do it because I thought the world's going to end. I just did it because it seemed to make sense. One road in, one road out, a local community that produces 10,000 times more than their needs. So one farmer in Parma, Idaho could feed 10,000 people. Whereas where I came from in San Diego, it takes 3 people outside of San Diego to keep one San Diegan alive. And by the way, the history of the world is big cities always abused the rural communities. It happened in France, it happened in England, it happened in Russia, it happened in China, it happened all over the world. It's happening in the United States where the farmers really feel abused. It's happening in Europe where the farmers are, up in arms saying, like, we're the breadbasket. We keep you guys alive. You can't be abusing us like this and coming up with rules that work in the city but have no business out here on the farm. And don't talk to us about the environment. We are the environment. We know more about the ground than you do. We know more about the water than you do. We know more about the food supply chain than you do. I bring that up because when you think local, there are things that you can do to help yourself, and then there are other people, you'll still specialize in things. You can't do everything, but an interesting thing that I learned about rural America. Rural Americans, or Russians, or rural anything, they know how to fix everything. Honest to God, they can fix their roof, they can grow anything, they can build anything, they're just not intimidated. And they had to learn how to do it because they live in a rural area, and getting somebody out with the expertise to do that, they have to pay $100 just to have them show up at the door before they even start. And they don't have that kind of money. So they just learn how to fix things on their own. They're very resourceful. You don't see that in the city. And most city folks can survive. If you are thinking about this stuff, then the thing that you think about is a minimum of a year's supply of food. I have 7-year supply of food. Mine is all freeze-dried and hermetically sealed and all that kind of stuff. And I did the high-end prepper, so mine are gourmet things, because if I'm going to suffer, I want to suffer at least, kind of gourmeting it as I'm going along. I have a 10,000-gallon underwater tank. I have a 40,000-gallon pool that I can convert into something else. I could cook inside, I could cook outside. I'm self-sufficient. If you're really into prepper mode, you would own a pickup truck, and you would own a pickup truck that was pre-1960, I forget what it is, but anything in the 1950s, because it has no electronics on it. And it's easy to work on the engine, they're easy to fix. You don't have all the electronics and all the other stuff that may not be viable going into the future. Typically, if you were a real prepper, you would have your own gas tank, your own gas pump, your own diesel pump, your own diesel tank, like a little mini gas station. And then you would have, probably as a prepper with decent land, you could probably support your family and lots of other people with 3 acres. Easy.
Well, the current economic system, what I call, and many economists are calling a death economy, is not sustainable. It's not working. Increasing numbers of people are seeing that. I have the wonderful opportunity to travel around the world a lot, speaking at events. And everywhere I go, I see that people are raising their consciousness. They're more and more understanding that the system isn't working. At the same time, the status quo is pushing back harder. And that's been true throughout history. Whenever there's been an interest in a new idea, let's call it a revolution. And some people object to that word, it's a little strong, but I think we're going through a consciousness revolution. And whenever there's something like this going on, the people who have the money and the power try to stop it. That's been true historically. The British Empire tried to stop the United States from breaking away from that rebellion. But the important thing here is for the people who are the agents of change, the rebels, if you will, to take energy from the opposition. So I've been a martial artist most of my life, and I know that if I'm up against a guy who's bigger and stronger than me, I can't outpower him. I can't overpower him. I've got to use his energy against him. And good agents of change, revolutionaries, if you want to call it that, will always use the energy that's thrown against them, that's thrown at them. They'll use it against their opponents. George Washington was a great example of that. He kept losing battles over and over and over. I mean, the guy had an amazing ability to stick in there regardless of what happened. His soldiers, their feet were bleeding. They, Valley Forge, and many other places, they had no shoes. They didn't have clothes. They were They had no food or very little food, but they just kept going. And they were throwing the British energy against the British. And they realized that. And, you know, I think, and the other thing is to change people's perception of what it means to be successful. So reality is molded by perception. You know, there's no United States, there's no Ukraine, there's no corporations, there's no religion, there's no culture except as we perceive them. And when enough people accept a perception or codify it into law, it changes our actions. And when we change our actions, we change reality. So you can really say that perception molds reality. And a great case was George Washington, because back in 1773, 1774, almost all Americans believed the British were invincible. Biggest, most powerful army in the world, best trained, best financed. You couldn't possibly go up against them. Washington recalled a time 20 years later, during the French and Indian War, the battle of what's called the Battle of the Monongahela in what's today Pennsylvania. And he recalled that he was with General Braddock, who was the best British general in America at the time, and the largest British army, and they were marching to Fort Duquesne, which would become Pittsburgh, but marching through the wilderness, this huge British army, and they were attacked by a much smaller band of Indians and Frenchmen, and totally defeated. Braddock was killed. Most all of his officers were killed. Hundreds of his men were killed. Very few French and Indians were even wounded. It was classic. And Washington remembered this. He was there. He was one of the few who survived. So he goes before I think before the Continental Congress, he speaks to people and he says, you know, the British aren't invincible. All we got to do is hide behind trees, change the perception of warfare. And, you know, it's all about changing perception and then taking actions, and that changes reality. And of course, Washington changed the reality of the British Empire at that point in time. And the British Empire never recovered, actually. So, you know, we're at this point in time now in history where we see that we've created a system that doesn't work, and it's based on a perception that we need to maximize short-term profits for corporations and materialistic consumption for everybody else. That's a perception that's molded a reality that is no longer working for us. So we got to change that perception and say, no, what we really need to do is maximize long-term benefits for all life on this planet.
There's a lot that can be done to oppose this agenda, and I would suggest that it begins at the individual level. It begins with everybody listening to me right now becoming informed. Don't just believe the things I said because I said them. You don't know me personally. Go read these documents that I'm making reference to. Go read these speeches that I'm making reference to. What you'll find is that this is exactly what these evildoers say, but the vast majority of people do not understand. So step one is really to educate ourselves and those in our immediate surrounding, maybe starting with our families, starting with our neighbors, with our churches, with our individual communities. So after you're done educating those in your immediate vicinity, I think it really needs to then become action-oriented. So I think that begins at the local level. You know, develop relationships with your city council, with your mayor, get involved in the local political process, get involved in the political parties at the local level, get involved somehow at the grassroots level, and maybe run for office, maybe support somebody running for office. So we have seen how much states and local governments can do to hold back this push for tyranny, even just recently. Here where we're sitting in my little corner of Florida during the COVID madness, we kind of just opted out. I mean, we didn't participate. Our local, our county, and our state government, for the most part, left us alone. In many cases, they actually actively intervened to protect us from the madness coming out of Washington, D.C. And we're seeing that right now with Agenda 2030, with these different UN programs. The legislature of Alabama voted unanimously over a decade ago to ban UN Agenda 21 in their state. Just very recently, we had a Louisiana State Senate vote unanimously to ban this World Health Organization power grab in their state. So this is something that can be replicated all around the world, even though we all have different political systems. If you're a member state of the European Union, ask your parliament to pass a law saying that we are not going to submit to this kind of tyranny in our country. If you live in Oklahoma, work with your state senator, work with your state representative to get a bill passed saying those ridiculous things coming out of the UN are not going to be enforced in our state. Anybody who tries to enforce them is going to be guilty of a crime, is going to be arrested, and is going to be prosecuted. These are all things that we can do. We can work with our sheriffs to make sure that they are understanding. Their job is to protect our rights. Their job is to uphold the Constitution that they swore to uphold, not impose whatever Joe Biden or the United Nations says they need to be imposing on us.
What changed me? That's a good question, right? Because I did believe that what I was doing was the right thing for a long time, but I began to suspect things, and Omar Torrijos, the head of state of Panama, an incredibly charismatic man. I really liked him. He was a party animal. You know, he loved to party and invited me to these wonderful barbecues, and his people loved him. And he was a David standing up to Goliath. He was standing up to the United States. He was insisting that the Panama Canal belonged to Panamanians. It should be reverted back. You know, Panama, and I would be there and see this huge swath that runs right through the center of the country. That's the canal zone. And it had something like, I think I got the number right, 18 private golf courses and these magnificent clubs and lots of movie theaters only for gringos, you know, or people that were employed by them. You know, it was a U.S. colony inside a sovereign state of Panama. And they had their own laws and their own police force and everything else. And it was a real thorn in the side of Panamanians, and Torrijos hated it. Now, Torrijos had been trained in the School of the Americas, a CIA school that trained, you know, operatives in Latin America to support the CIA. So he knew what was going on. He'd been trained there, and he came out of it, and he, you know, he was absolutely determined to stand up to the United States. And he was becoming very popular around the world as this David, little country that had a big canal, but very few other resources and no military. It had a National Guard, but no other military. It didn't have a very big economy. And here he's standing up to the United States. And so he's a problem for the American government. And I'm sent down to convert him, to bring him around, to bribe him, to corrupt him, to bring him around. And he gets it, and I liked him, and he could see that I had a conscience, and I just didn't understand what I was doing was wrong. And Omar says to me, he says, you know, what you're doing is terrible. It's really wrong, and I want you to understand that. Why don't you come work for me? You won't make nearly as much money, but you'll have a lot more fun. You know, look what I got. And you'll be doing the right thing. You'll be doing something really good for the world. And it got to me, you know, like I got it. Like that really rang true to me. And then he started showing me numbers and statistics about, you know, what GDP really represents. And I began doing more and more research on this. And finally, I reached the conclusion I couldn't continue to do this. But I have to say, it was next to impossible to get out. For one thing, nobody wanted me to get out, and I was constantly told, well, you've got a great deal. I was a partner in this major consulting firm that was a partnership, and I was the youngest partner in the 100-year history of the firm. And you know, I was told, you know, so look, you're doing good work, and you're making a lot of money, and you're flying first class around the world and staying in the finest hotels and eating in the best restaurants and wining and dining with presidents. And I grew up the son of a teacher in rural New Hampshire, you know. This was the American dream that I was living. And so not only was I having a lot of pressure not to get out, but there was this other side of me that didn't want to get out because I was living the American dream. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I was miserable. I was living on Valium and alcohol and caffeine. And so, I would travel, like, for example, I was traveling to Indonesia a lot, and I would fly from Boston, end up spending a night in someplace like Hong Kong. And, I'd go hang out in the bar at night, drink a lot of alcohol, take a Valium, knock myself out, go to bed, have to get up in the morning and drink tons of coffee, and then fly off to Indonesia and meet with people and negotiate huge deals, lots and lots of money. And I realized that maybe this was the American dream, but it wasn't my dream. I wasn't happy. So that was very, very important thing to finally see. But I think there's a lot of people in this business today still, there were then and there still are, who really believe they're doing the right thing. And they're stuck in a system that reinforces that over and over. I was taught in business school, that this was the right thing. Invest lots of money in infrastructure, watch the GDP grow. The World Bank continued to promote this. It still does. The business schools still do. How do we encourage people to wake up? How do we get them to wake up to what's really going on? And we see a lot of people waking up these days. So what's really going on? I think if we just keep hammering away, my job is to do it through writing. I write books and films and speaking out. But everybody can play a role. Teachers can teach kids about this and teach people about this. And I was lecturing a couple of months ago at a major U.S. college. And I give this speech about how we create a death economy and we need a life economy. And what I was doing was creating this death economy and this imperialistic system. And at the end, I opened it up to questions. And the gentleman in the room raises his hand. I called him. He said, I'm an economics professor here. I've been here for 10 years. I'm tenured. And I've just realized that all this time, without even realizing it, I was teaching people to produce a death economy, to create an empire. I was actually encouraging people to become economic hitmen. That was my job, and I've just realized it. And then he said, what can I do about it? That's my question to you, Mr. Perkins. What can I do about it? I said, well, first of all, don't lose your job. These kids need you. So don't be too radical about this. It's a little bit like, saying we need to get off oil, but we can't do it tomorrow. We've got to be reasonable about it. We've got to move into it. And I said, so, tell these students what they can do to create a life economy. Don't tell them not to create a death economy. Show them what they can do. Go into business that creates better solar energy or better wind power or whole new forms of energy that we haven't even conceived of yet. And go into businesses that create technologies for mining all the plastic that's in the oceans and recycling it or restoring destroyed forests or destroyed mine pits. Encourage your students to look to businesses that they will feel proud of sending on to their children and grandchildren. So, move into this, but don't lose your job. But we also have to understand that some people will never get it. And don't bother to try. Like if Aunt Susie sits around the table during Thanksgiving and is insistent that there are no problems in the world and everything's just right, and she's totally insistent on that, let her have her insistence. Go to Uncle Ed, who is open to thinking in new ways. And I think that this is important. So yes, there are people that are economic hitmen today. There are jackals. There are people in the CIA who've been perhaps brainwashed. They've come out of the Navy SEALs, or they've come out of someplace like that. And they're probably never going to get it. But if we can get to the people who are their bosses, or if we can get to the general population who's going to elect the next leaders of our country, and consciousness changes, then they will change too. And it's been my experience that I've known quite a few of jackals, and I've learned from these people that usually, they're followers. They may be extremely brave at going out and shooting people or doing whatever it is, but they will follow what they're told is the right thing. They don't necessarily think too much about what really is the right thing. They trust the sergeant, they trust the general, they trust whoever. And so if we can, change the perception of what it means to be successful, then those who are most committed to doing whatever it is it takes will do what it takes to turn all that around and create the life economy. So how do you define success? And if we can turn around the definition of success from being one of accumulating more and more stuff, maximizing profits and so on, and say, yeah, businesses have to make a profit, but they don't have to maximize it. They can put some of it toward the long term and toward helping their employees more. Why does Musk or why do any of the billionaires have to keep making more and more and more billions? It's a sickness. It's an addiction. I want my boat. Your yacht is bigger than mine. I got to go out and buy a new yacht, and it's a sickness. It's an addiction. You can call it anything you want.
So we now have a system in the United States where parents are considered equal partners with the government. This is actually enshrined in federal policy. And if you read the policy, they don't mean equal partners at all. They mean parents are the junior partners. And they've testified to this. Miguel Cardona, the Secretary of Education under Joe Biden, was asked point blank in a Senate hearing if parents are the primary stakeholders in the education of their children. He said, well, they're important stakeholders, but really educators, and he cut them off there. So they regard parents as, at best, an annoyance, to be kind of kept at arm's length. This is, in my opinion, straight from the pit of hell, right? There's nobody who loves a child more than his or her parents. There's nobody who cares more about the well-being of that child than his or her parents. But this actually gets to really a fundamental question that I think all of us should be asking is, why did we allow the government to educate our children in the first place? I mean, if you look back at the history, I can tell you, it wasn't to give them a good education. It was always to move them in a particular direction. I frankly think we need to get away from that whole idea. Government really should not be in the business of education. The purpose of government, the Bible says, is to punish evil. It's not to educate kids. It's not to give you health care. It's not to take your neighbor's money and give it to you. It's to punish evil. And when they do that, they're acting in their lane. When they're trying to educate children, even if they had the best of intentions, right? It's like the collective farms in the Soviet Union. Even if the people running the collective farms had good intentions, which they often didn't, it still wouldn't work because it's just, you get rid of the proper incentives, you have government control instead of market mechanisms and price signals. So it's a disaster, even in the best of circumstances. The solution then isn't to alter the policy a little bit or to do some policy tweaks and improve the collective farm. The solution is to get rid of the collective farm and go back to what worked, which was private property rights. And I believe that really is going to have to be the long-term solution when it comes to education. We never should have allowed government, we never should have trusted government with the education of our children in the first place. If you look at American history, for almost all of American history up until starting in the mid-1800s, education was entirely the responsibility of parents, and to the extent that they needed some assistance or wanted some assistance, they went to their churches, they went to their communities, they went to their extended family, they went to their neighbors. They didn't turn to government. So in my opinion, this is one of the most critical issues. Even in the countries where education hasn't gotten as horrific as it has in the United States, people need to know that's the direction it's headed. I know that's the direction it's headed because the US government, the UNESCO, the UN Education Agency are working together on bringing all the education systems of the world into this global system. And so that's the direction it's moving. And I think parents and church leaders and people from all walks of life, taxpayers, need to really ask, is this appropriate for the government to educate our children? And I hope that they will find that the answer is no, that's not appropriate.
Our ability to survive is our ability to be local, think local. The idea that the elites who did this to everybody somehow win in the end is not true. That's the failure will be so colossal that everybody will reject it, and the only way to survive is to be local, wherever you're at. Think local, think local. All your happiness is local. all the people that you associate with that you'll depend on are local. You almost have to kind of look at it like planets, right? So we have our solar system, we got our few little planets around us. You think about your own personal life. I have people that I'm really close to, but that's very few. I know lots of people. I have lots of people that consider me their friends. But the reality is I'm limited because time limits me. Honestly, I would have 1 million planets around me if I could, and if I could have all that time, but I don't have that time with them. So I have to really think about finding a place that is local with people who are like-minded like me. People who are like-minded have a value system. Their politics is common sense. It's not Democrat or Republican or liberal or whatever. All those things are really quite meaningless when it comes down to looking back at your life and who's in your bedroom as you're taking your last breath. It's those last few planets that are around you. It's all local. So, and the elites can't change that. They'll never be able to change that, ever.
Their primary goals are to supposedly make the world a better place.
The intelligence community is intertwined with all of this.
The goal of this whole enterprise is to transfer money from working Americans to the super rich.
The real problems in the world are created primarily by leaders. It's the leaders.
Truth first, uncensored, community funded. Continue watching exclusively on Unified TV.